behind the scenes, it was a small group of people that were doing everything.
Welcome back to the GTM podcast. It's your host, Scott Barker.
I want to know how this insane growth actually happened.
What's going on, everyone? Welcome back to the pod. Hope you're having a good day wherever you're listening to this, whether you're on your way to work, at the gym, doing your thing late night and catching up, trying to grow your career, accelerate your business. We're excited to have you. And I've got an excellent guest lined up. I am joined by Mike Vichich. Mike, welcome, man.
Thanks, Scott. Glad to be here, man. Thanks for hosting me.
Excited to have you. Excited to unpack your story because it's been a wild ride for you. And, I'll just kind of dive right into it. For our listeners, Mike is the co-founder and CEO of Wisely. He then sold that to Olo for $187 million in 2021. So congrats on that. And he's currently kind of contemplating his next move. You're married with 3 sons, live in Ann Arbor, Michigan. What else should people know about you?
No, I think you got the big stuff. I'm looking forward to running it back. So, I'm doing the second time founder thing, trying to not make mistakes I made the first time, and also avoid the common traps of a second time founder. I think many people will try to be too cute, and I think at some point it's just a leap of faith you got to take. I don't think you're going to be able to you're not able to analyze your way to figuring something out. You just got to dive in and start figuring it out. So I'm trying to keep that in mind as well.
I love that. And that's kind of largely the premise of this pod. It's just to, give people the real behind the scenes look at, how companies are built, how people are building the revenue engines. And, that's certainly why I was excited to get you on. We have had your good friend Juan George on the pod before. So for any listeners who haven't listen to that episode. It's super good.
JG's the man.
He certainly is. I got to hang out with him in Napa at our retreat recently, which was super fun. So before we kind of dive into it, so we were catching up the other day, and I said that it sounds like you have the sickness, which many of us have who have built or built companies or tried to build VC firms or whatever it is, where you're thinking about starting the founder journey again, from scratch. And I know you've been ideating on a few things. I won't, make you share what you're thinking about, but how have you been approaching that ideating process? How have you been validating ideas? I feel like entrepreneurs, or all of us really, have so many ideas. They're like, one day I'm going to do this, or I see this opportunity. How have you gone about sort of validating those as you think about your next move?
Yeah, for sure. Well, we sold the company in November of 2021, and I left Olo in February of this year, February of 2023. So I was there for about 15 months. And when I left, my wife and I had our 3rd son in February. So I was basically spent 3 months in dad mode, not thinking about much. I did read some books, but it was, feeding babies and changing diapers. That was basically all I was doing. That was a good total decompression time, from a work point of view. Then I think in May, June of this year, I started to take some meetings with people that I thought might lead to an interesting place, for no real rhyme or reason. And I also started talking to a bunch of second time founders, just trying to hear, how they went about it the second time and some thoughts that they had, how they approached it. So those kind of part of it. I think the other part of it was trying to do some self-reflection, right? What are things that I would definitely do again on my next startup? What are things that I definitely would not do again? And what are some things that I didn't do the first time that I want to try this time? And, writing that list out in 3 columns. And then I just every so often will run what I'm thinking about that day back through that framework and see if I'm stepping out of bounds on any of those things. Also writing down my values, what Charlie Munger from, Warren Buffett's famed business partner, recommends that everybody write their eulogy. So I try to do that. What do you want to be true at the end of your life? And I've been reflecting on that stuff and just having conversations with cool people that I thought might go someplace.
I haven't heard that one, and I'm a pretty big Charlie Munger fan. He's got a lot of good one-liners and quotes for sure over the years. But writing your eulogy, I think that's a really cool exercise for all of our listeners to do, and maybe even do it as like a executive leadership team or something. Could be cool, and share bits of it. Um, you said something there. I've never heard anyone with a newborn baby call it decompression time. That's pretty.
Well, it's our third one.
Yeah, fair. You've got it nailed.
We know what
now.
we're doing at this point. Yeah, exactly. 3 boys.
There
We've seen this movie before.
Yeah, love it. Awesome. Okay, so I want to dive in and unpack a lot of that self-reflection, and we'll do that kind of through the story of what worked, what didn't, what you would change. But fly me back to the beginning, man, of your entrepreneurial journey. What did it look like? When did you become crazy enough to think you could, start your own business?
So I left college in 2006, and was when I graduated at Michigan State. Go Green! Rough time for any Spartans out there, though, on a number of different levels. But left in 06. I was at Accenture until 2011, so 5 years, and moved up quickly and proved to myself that I could, do well at a job out of school, right? And lingering in the back of my mind was like, I want to start a company. Wasn't exactly sure what it was. Didn't have the proverbial idea. And so, I think that made me stay at Accenture longer. One thing that happened was I led recruiting at Michigan and at Northwestern for the undergrad group, and recruited my co-founder, Tyler, from Northwestern to Accenture. And he and I worked together on a bunch of different projects. And we were in the office late one night and thought we had a particularly genius idea, which, by the way, we did not. But we thought we did. And I was like, we should really think about how we tell this to our client. And he's like, why don't we just leave and start that company instead? And I'm like, that's like a pretty cool idea, actually. So we started thinking about that. That idea ended up not going anywhere, but it gave us the courage to kind of jump out of the plane. So I left in September. I took a part-time consulting gig where I worked 3 days a week for a guy that I used to work for at Accenture. And then I had the other 4 days a week to figure out what I was going to do next. And then we ended up raising money for Wisely, or what evolved into Wisely, in April of 2012. So it was about 8 month period from when I left Accenture to when I officially started working on what evolved into Wisely. So, and then he left around that same time as well.
I feel like that's good advice for founders there. Is like, as you're kind of in this ideating phase, is you need that focus, but you also don't want to be super worried and strapped that there's no money coming in the door. So taking it's easier now to get fractional work and consulting, especially if you have some experience under your belt, and can give you, I imagine, a little more breathing room. You didn't have to rush. And then when you found that idea, you could sort of go all in.
Definitely. I think the not rushing point is super key, by the way. Like that product market, people talk all the time about product market fit, but I would also say it's product market timing fit. And so it's really hard to rush that. I mean, I think I would rather take longer to find really strong product market fit than have kind of okay product market fit and start going. So if you have the ability to kind of delay the starting gun, I think that is beneficial in many cases.
Do you have any exercises or ways you evaluate product market timing fit? Is it just a natural market pull? I guess, how would you differentiate than the typical, product market fit?
Yeah. It's something I've spent a lot of time thinking about recently. Some of it, having seen this before, some of it is just spidey sense, right? I know how hard or not hard it was to sell the various products that we offered at Wisely. And so I saw that, right? I saw kind of, when you talk about a problem, how eager to solve it people are. And then when you propose a solution, I saw whether they were like, oh, wow, I need that now. And they start pulling the next steps out of you versus, oh, that's kind of cool. That's really helpful. That would be valuable for me. All the words that people say because they don't really want to, hurt someone's feelings or tell a founder that it's not that big of a pain point. But I think so. There's a bit of spidey sense, but I think if you made me put a metric on it, the challenge is like when you first ship something, you don't really have it. You have no retention data, right? You have no gross or net retention data because you won't have that for years or a year and a half probably. So that isn't it. You don't really yet have legit like NPS data of like how people would describe your product. Usage data even might be very nascent. So I think what I would argue is, and this comes from Sam Altman blog post about product market fit, but I think he argues that the earliest indicator of solid product market fit are people using the thing that you built, sharing it organically with their friends through word of mouth. And if you start getting, if you're using the thing, Scott, and then Max sends me a note and says, hey, can I use that thing? Like that would be an indicator that it's really working, is people sharing it just, with their community. And that resonates with me too, because that's what I've done when I've found something that's awesome. So that's my take on it.
I like that one. And it's pretty simple to track. You just track basically like referrals, people that are coming to you that someone else is recommending, or introductions that you get.
Yeah, the offline part I think is a little harder, but you can piece that together, right? Because you're probably talking not that many customers, especially in a B2B thing. So if I see Max fill out the lead form and I go look him up on LinkedIn as a buddy of Scott, I'm like, whoa, did you guys talk about this? And so it's kind of analog, but that's one way to track it.
And then just, being super, paying careful attention to the language people are using. I think, we have a lot of revenue leaders that listen to this, and we've all been on demos or presentations, and there's a difference between that like wow moment, and you can feel their body language like changing, and they're no longer typing emails anymore, and they're locked in, versus, just kind of going through the motions.
Yeah, for sure. You can definitely tell. And the trick of that is like there's a Richard Feynman quote: "The easiest person to lie to is oneself." So as a founder, you really, really, really want the thing to work. So I think there's a bias toward being optimistic oftentimes, and so I try to check that and try to inject pessimism into my own thinking. Like, do you really say that? Why exactly? Like, what would you do if this thing didn't exist? Questions like that. My co-founder Tyler has a good line. He says, "It's not customer discovery if you leave the conversation disappointed. That's sales." So in the early days, you shouldn't feel disappointed. Otherwise, it seems like you've got a solution that you're trying to push rather than just understand the problem.
So if I'm hearing that right, it's like you're doing so much discovery that you get to a point where you're like, oh, this isn't like perfect, but we can make this work. Is that kind of what I'm hearing?
Yeah, I mean, if you have conversations with a bunch of people, I think it's natural to start, forming an opinion on how that might be solved, right? And then you kind of gradually move into selling that thing or selling that solution. And then if you feel people saying like things that disappoint you about it, like that's not my number one priority, or I already solve it decent enough over here because of this other thing, that's where the disappointment can creep in. And that is just like a little alarm bell that should go off in someone's head. Like, I'm actually not doing customer discovery now, I'm selling. And that's fine, but just know that that's what you're doing. And I think in the early product market fit times, you want to err toward discovery.
That's great. I like this idea too of like injecting pessimism in your own thinking as well to really like make sure you're seeing things clearly. And that's a good line. Easiest person to lie to is oneself. Very, very true. All right. Walk me through the Wisely story. Every founder starting a business, dreams of this outcome, selling for, hundreds of millions of dollars. Like that's the dream. But how did that dream actually come to light?
It was painful, man. I mean, the first 4.5 years, so we started the company April 5th of 2012 until Labor Day of 2016. we did not have any semblance of product market fit at all. We launched and killed 3 different consumer apps, and none of them worked. And we were very, very close to quitting a number of different times and ran out of cash. Like there was one point where we had $11 in our company bank account. And like my wife was at the grocery store a couple of times and our credit cards didn't work. Like we were that close to quitting. And, we just felt like the stuff we were building was getting better. Like the quality of the software we were building was getting better. And we hadn't like figured it out yet. If the way I kind of think about it is like the slope of the line was up, but we were still underwater. So we couldn't breathe yet. But we kind of said like, okay, if you take time out and we keep improving, at some point we'll come above the water and we'll figure it out. So we just kept getting better. There was actually a Jim Collins talk where he talks about the Stockdale paradox. Have you heard this?
I haven't. Walk me through it.
So it's basically this guy who was the highest ranking, and I might mess up some of the details here, but a guy who was the highest ranking military official who was a POW in the Hanoi Hilton in Vietnam. And what he said was that it's the optimists who died. And the way he tells the story, which was counterintuitive to me, because I would have thought the optimists were the ones that made it out. And the way he tells the story is that the optimists set goals and deadlines. They're like, oh, we'll be out of here by Christmas. And Christmas would come and go. And then they'll say, oh, we'll be out of here by next Christmas, though. And next Christmas would come and go. And eventually they just lost hope. They said, we're never getting out of here. And when you lose hope, they went to a dark place. And so his mental model was one that really resonated with me during those times of Wisely that were really painful was, have an unwavering faith that you will figure it out. And going through that process will become a defining story of your life. Right. So, the story that I wanted to be able to tell was, yes, it was hard, but we kept moving. We kept trying to solve the next problem and we kept making forward progress. And I thought we'd eventually figure it out. So that was kind of like inspiration behind the scenes. And then, in 2016, when we ran out of cash, we actually just fully dropped all the consumer stuff we were going to do. I sent out a list. I bought a list and sent out an email to like 3,700 people in restaurants. I mean, a ridiculous percentage of those emails bounced, but basically was not selling any particular product. I was talking about why it mattered to know who the guest was and to know their behavior and know what their preferences were. So we got a few email responses to that email. One of them was from the co-founder and CEO of a restaurant group on the East Coast called Bar Taco. And it was like, hey, I love that idea. We have a waitlist system right now that doesn't have a CRM in it. So I could have my number one customer walk in and we wouldn't be any the wiser unless someone personally recognized them. And that's not what we want, right? We want to be able to make sure we're consistently recognizing the guests who are our best customers. And by the way, recognizing people who are new to us. So it was about personalizing the experience, no matter if you were a first time diner or, someone who's been in a bunch. And so that conversation started maybe in March or April of 2016. We wrote our first line of code in May, and this is a process I'm repeating now with startup number 2, is we had them sign an LOI, so a letter of intent. It was non-binding, but it basically said, hey, here's the spec of what we're going to build. It's going to do A, B, C, D, E. And here's the schedule of how we're going to work on it. Here's the involvement we need from your team. And when we deliver this thing, you agree to pay us $220 per location per month, I think it was. And they said, sure, we'll sign it. And there was no risk to them. They didn't have to fund it. And then in September, we shipped the first version of it over Labor Day weekend, and it worked. And then they rolled it out to the remainder of their restaurants. And then we just kept, selling and building. And that was the beginning of the flywheel. So from basically January of 2017 through 2021, got to about 10 million in CAR. And by just repeating that same thing, it broadened from waitlist to basically a CDP and a CRM for restaurant brands with marketing automation built into it. where our key differentiator was like we focused on the lifetime value of the customer, not just trying to get people to sign up for a loyalty program or something, but actually who are your best customers? How do you find more of them? How do you retain them? How do you keep them coming back?
I'm excited to dive into, the successful part of that journey, 2017 and beyond. But quickly want to touch on, 2016, you run out of cash. It sounds like you had the right mindset, right? This idea of unwavering faith, and this will be the thing that you're defined by. It's going to define the story of your life. So I love that mindset. But as leaders, you need to infect your team and those like around you with that same mindset and almost shelter them from what's going on. What were some of the strategies, I guess, you used to compartmentalize? You have your wife literally sometimes not able to buy groceries. Like, walk me through that as a leader. And I think it's really relevant right now. There's a lot of things going on in the world, and it's an interesting time, and leaders, we need to find a way to sort of stay focused and motivate our team. So how did you find ways to do that?
Well, you're totally right. The people around you make all the difference. And I think had a couple of things gone differently for us, it would have been game over. Like, for example, I was clear that I did not want to get a divorce over the company. And I wasn't going to do that. So, if there ever became a point where my wife was like, this isn't working for me anymore, I would have shut it down. I just know that. And I'm insanely grateful to her for being supportive. And we worked through stuff. Like, there was one time where I was pitching, like you said at the beginning, I live in Ann Arbor, and there was this thing at the law school. It's called Ann Arbor New Tech Meetup. And I plugged my phone into the screen. I was about to do a demo. This is like 2015, late 2015. And my phone is projecting on the screen behind me. And all of a sudden I'm introducing myself. I'm like, whatever. And people start laughing. And I'm like, what's so funny? I didn't say anything funny. And I turned around and I forgot to mute my messages, right? So right before the message from my wife went away, it said, "Are you coming with me to therapy tonight?" And that was in front of like a few hundred people. And half the audience was horrified for me. The other half was like, laughing out of awkwardness. And I just said, look, like, starting a company is hard. And I think you have to be willing to talk about what's not going well. And I believe that my relationship with my wife will be better for it. We're going to work through our problems and not ignore them. And so, people in the audience clapped. But I think that same mindset applied, obviously with my wife, but also with my co-founders too. We were like basically 4 people at the time. So, it wasn't like we had 20 people we had to convince. It was just 4 of us. And we ended up redistributing some equity to people because we felt it was the right thing to do and it made sense. They needed to wake up every day and feel like this was the right decision for their lives as well. And so that, that was the thing that we did during that time. But, it was about aligning the incentives just to make sure that, it was the right actual decision for everyone. And then we had, I think, like, that was an important moment for me because up until that point, I hadn't really failed at something in my life or my career before. And my identity was the company's success, or it was the company, right? And the company was objectively a piece of shit at the time. Like, it was. So I'm like, wait a minute, my identity is the company and the company is a piece of shit. Does that mean I'm a piece of shit? I don't think so. I'm like trying really hard and trying to do the right thing, but it's just not working. So that was a painful separation, but it ultimately, I think, became a superpower of the company, where I would tell people years later, like, I'm sorry to disappoint you, but you work at a company where the CEO is wrong every day. And I hate being wrong. I want to be less wrong. So it's never a good reason to do something because the CEO said, or because your manager said. Here, we only want you to do something if you think it's the right thing to do. And if you don't think it's the right thing to do, loyalty means saying that. Loyalty doesn't mean just doing it anyways and following the order blindly. Loyalty means speaking up and saying, like, I actually disagree with this decision. I don't think it's going to work for this reason. And then one of 2 things happens. One, you save the company in some way, right? Because we were about to make a bad decision and we changed our course based on your input. Or there was something that you believed that turned out not to be correct. And so that was an educational opportunity that once we, shared something about the approach or the strategy or the why we were doing whatever it was, that unlocked the step change in you, right? Because now you understood something that you previously didn't. And if you iterate through that for years and years and years, then I think that builds a really strong culture around critical thinking. And that ultimately became a superpower for us. And that was something that we put into every, job interview that every person we were hiring. We were trying to make sure that they would disagree respectfully with their leaders. And the measure of success was like, could a new salesperson or a new BDR on an all hands, could they raise their hand and ask the VP of engineering why we're doing that way, right? And vice versa. Could a new engineer or a new designer ask the CRO, hey, why does that make sense? That was the sign of a healthy tension and healthy critical thinking. So that was, one of the gifts of that dark period. And I hope that, to the point about it becoming a defining experience in my life, that was probably the most central thing that I learned during that time.
Decoupling our self-worth from, our achievements is very, very difficult and tough to do. Particularly people with, what we call the sickness or very driven, type A folks. And, your ability to do that and then be comfortable, telling the team how often you make mistakes. And, that created this culture. I think people don't speak up a lot of the time because they're worried about being wrong. And if you create this culture that embraces, hey, the mistakes are how we're going to learn, and that is how we learn. Arguably, you learn a lot more from a mistake than you do from getting it right. And you cycle that through an entire organization, the speed at which you're learning is just growing, exponentially.
For sure. And I think, one thing that I felt myself doing in other roles I've been in my career is like, I wasn't in the meetings that the person to whom I reported was in, right? So, for example, if I report to someone who's on the executive team, I assume that, let's say it's the CRO, that CRO is seeing all the things, right? Like they're talking to finance, they're talking to product and engineering and design and people. And so they have a different perspective that I have. So despite I might disagree with a particular decision on this thing within revenue, but I don't know the context of like, there's a lot of other stuff going on. So it's, people, I think oftentimes rightfully so, give people the benefit of the doubt. And what we would say at Wisely was, forget all that stuff. We want you to disagree. We would rather you disagree and actually be proven incorrect than not disagree at all, right? Because that assumption that there's all these other competing things that I don't know about, I think oftentimes causes suboptimal decisions to go through. And whereas if someone just questioned it, someone would say, oh, yeah, that actually makes sense. We shouldn't be doing that.
Yeah. Because the inverse can also be true. This CRO might have all this context from all these other competing decisions, but you might have context from the customer or a few deals that you recently did that they're actually missing. And so you could be that missing, puzzle piece that actually.
Yeah. So we try to think about it like more as like a network of decision making rather than a hierarchy. Like that was something we worked very hard at doing too.
Talk me through that a little bit more. That sounds interesting. So a network of decision making.
In some companies, if like a sales rep directly messaged the product leader and said, hey, I was just on a customer call and, this thing didn't land. And I think we need instead to build this other feature. I think in a lot of cases, the product leader would be like, work through your normal channels, please. Like go talk to this other delegate over here. And then it just, every time you do that, you play the telephone game. And then 6 weeks later, the product leader hears a tenth of what that initial person saw 6 weeks ago. So you get lower fidelity communication, number one, and it takes way longer. So that was something that we tried to nip in the bud. There's a great Mark Andreessen quote that cycle time compression is one of the most compelling forces that determine startup winners and losers, right? So any cycle from, putting something out on the marketing site to having that drive a lead, to having that lead get qualified, to discovery to demo to booked to live to revenue, like all of those individual piece parts is a cycle time, and it adds up, and it can totally change the makeup of what the customer economics look like. So, I think direct communication, going directly to the person that can solve the problem, is often the better way. And yeah, it does make things harder, especially for leaders, because you can get hit up, in a lot of different ways, but that's a separate problem, right? Solve that separately, figure out a way to create the space for that to happen.
I like the idea of cycle time compression. You can kind of look at every system and process you have and be like, how do we compress each crank of this flywheel? Yeah. Okay. So sounds like, there's a lot of things that you got right in terms of culture, this network of kind of decision making versus making everything go through a hierarchy. What else did you do right in 2017? You have this LOI, you deliver it, it's starting to work. You're now figuring out how to make that repeatable and scalable. When you look back, what were some of the defining things you did right, you think?
We got one person, actually two critical board members, to join our board. One was the founder of Barteca, which was Bar Taco and Barcelona Wine Bar. His name's Andy Forzheimer. He sold his restaurant company for $325 million. So he knew the restaurant business inside and out. And then we had another person named David Cantu, who was one of the co-founders of a company called Hot Schedules, which was the largest, labor and scheduling system out there. Basically, it allowed, in the early days, it was the first product that allowed two servers to trade their shifts at a restaurant, for example. So we had the insider's view from the restaurateur's point of view, and then the insider's view from successful restaurant tech company. And that was a huge unlock, both in terms of understanding the market for me, but I think also making me a better CEO. I can't even list for you. There's innumerable things that Andy chipped away and helped me become a better CEO and challenged me. So that was a big unlock for us. The other thing was, and so that was 2017, 2018. In 2021, I remember having the thought that every part of the company was shaking. It was about to come off the rails. I imagine a mine cart going down the train tracks, in a gold mine or something. It's you feel like it's going to come off the rails at any second. That felt like marketing, sales, customer success, support, onboarding, product, engineering, finance, and people. It's the whole thing felt that way. And I remember thinking I'm going to lose control of this thing. And I had the thought, I need a COO. That was where my mind went. And then I read a blog post called something to the effect of how to operate, or the SaaS cadence that David Sachs wrote. It was July of 2021. I had read that on a Friday, and that it immediately clicked for me in a way that I was oh my goodness, this is exactly what I needed to read. The main takeaway from the blog post is that most functions inside of a startup operate off of a kind of a 3-month sequential rolling basis. So sales and finance, his argument was make them operate on a fiscal calendar. So let's say January 1st to the end of March. That's when, Q1 started and when it ended. And then in our company, as in most companies, product and engineering were on that same 3-month cycle. What he said was offset those by 45 days, right? So have the spring release start February 15th and end in the middle of May, right? And that may sound really basic and not novel, but the thing that it did was a few things. One is from a product and engineering perspective, it put a lot of emphasis on getting the quarterly roadmap shipped, because we were going to do a release event for it. We put a bunch of marketing behind it. We drove our customers and prospects to it. And if the thing wasn't done and we needed to demo it, we were going to be in a tough spot. So it created a compelling reason to get things done. And then we had a couple of weeks of from an Eng perspective, a little bit of a lull after that huge, marathon sprint ended, right? So that was one thing. But the other part of it that I think is probably more important is that it created absolute focus for the executive team. For the first, from like January 1st to the middle of Feb, all the focus in the world was on, are we going to ship the release? And there goes this weird thumbs up thing. Are we going to ship the release, or are we going to, or are we not? And are we going to get enough people to come to our release event, or are we not? And the focus was all around that. Then after that, it was, okay, close the quarter, hit the sales numbers, right? And everyone's focus was around that. Product, engineering, like we had every leader in the company had like a deal that they were supporting just so that everyone was close to the customer. And then so we were never more than 45 days away from like a major company milestone, either one related to product or one related to sales. And that was super helpful. The other part, like specifically the benefit of that from the go-to-market team's point of view, was we had this issue where a lot of our sales came in the back month and in the back 2 weeks and in the last day of the quarter, right? And that's scary. No one wants to be in that mode. So what the release allowed was that in the middle of February, there was reason for our reps to be reaching out with and engaging all of our prospects, right? Because we had this event that we wanted to share all the new stuff that we'd created. So it gave them a non-salesy way to actually reach out to people and just invite them to come check out this session, right? It was a low commitment from them. They got to see what we were up to. They got to hear from other leaders in the industry who we brought to that release event. And so that pulled forward, a lot of sales. And I think we did that 5 times from when I first read that blog post to when we sold the company. And the chain, I'm still shocked by how quickly the brand of Wisely developed during that time. Like we went from relatively unknown nobody to a company that was seen as, oh, these people are actually shipping a lot of really cool stuff. And I think it was, that was one of the main reasons why that pace kept accelerating. Our brand kept getting stronger and stronger.
That was an incredible breakdown, and we'll try and wrestle up that David Sachs post. I do remember reading that a while back, but I'll have to revisit it, and we'll put it in
He's got some good ones
in the show notes. He does. That's great, man. I love this idea of, finding a way to have a non-salesy event action that arms your team halfway through the quarter to have this like compelling event, to have a meaningful conversation that happens way before. That's big. And talk about just setting yourself up for success. Like who wouldn't want to sell in that organization of like, okay, now I have 2 compelling events instead of 1, so I'm 50% more likely on paper to be successful. That's cool. Okay. Man, we could probably dive into that more and more, but I do want to get to a listener question. And I think you're going to have a great take on it. And it kind of goes full circle from what we were talking about at the very beginning about like product market fit. And the question is, this is from a founder. Once you felt you had product market fit, what were the first things you did to try to accelerate your growth? And then in parentheses, they put, we have limited cash to work with.
Well, what comes to mind there is kind of the transition from founder-led sales to building a sales machine, right? And I would say, first of all, I did, because we had not found product market fit for 4.5 years. When we found it, I kind of didn't believe it. So I was late. I think I was probably 6 to 9 months late, where like we actually had product market fit, but I wasn't acting as though we did. And so it was that board member, Andy, that I told you about, who challenged me on that. He's like, look, like you're selling the same thing repeatedly over and over again. Like that's product market fit, right? And I'm like, yeah, actually, I think it is. And people were happy with the product. So number one, I would say like, maybe if it took you a while to get there, maybe you have it a little bit earlier than you thought you did, because we did have that thing that I described where people were referring their friends to it. So that's like one thought. But I think, the second one is how you move sequentially from founder-led sales to building a sales machine. I think basically like I believe that if the founder can't sell it, no one's going to, number one. So do that first. Then I would bring in 2 reps and I would work with them until they were both selling it repeatedly, right? And the good thing about that is there's no training program at all. It's literally, here's a bag of rocks, hit the deep end and jump in, right? There's no training, there's no onboarding, there's no infrastructure, there's nothing, right? You have an email account and maybe that's it. So those initial 2 reps, they learn through osmosis, right? And then you're able to replicate that. Then I would hire a sales leader to replicate those 2 reps, right? What made them successful? Who are they? What's their background? What's the ACV type? How long's the cycle time? Who are the customers they're closing? How hard is it to sell actually, right? And then the sales leader will evaluate all those things that I just said and build out a team that can do that. And that's kind of the 1, 2, 3 step of how I would go from founder selling to not founder selling at a high level. I think kind of implicit in that, in the question was like, we're kind of strapped for cash. So what do you do when like you can't just hire your way out of it? I think in terms of payback periods on this stuff, right? Like, because on the one hand, you're to spend more money, to burn more money, you're diluting the cap table because it takes more cash. So basically, if you can make the argument that, and I also don't think in terms of annual comp. It's like, if I pay, just for the sake of easy math, 120K all in for a person, that's 10 grand a month, right? So if I expect that it's going to take this person 3 or 4 months to ramp up, that's a $30,000 or $40,000 investment. Then they hit their quota, right? So if their base is 120, that puts their all-in comp at, let's say, 240, and you want your quota to be 10x their total comp. So let's just call it 2 million, and back of the envelope math. Like, how long is the sales cycle? And you can start to build a little model in your mind of like how long it'll take for that particular rep to pay back, or that particular marketer, or whatever. I think generally speaking, any high performer is accretive if you give them 6 months, right? Like, meaning like they will benefit the company more than they cost after 6 months. So you just got to figure out, I think if you have a smaller amount of cash to work with, that means you have to sequence more things rather than doing it in parallel. And that I think works, so that would be my advice in that particular situation.
Great advice and super prescriptive. The 3-step process makes total sense. I guess the one thing I'll say on that is those 2 initial reps. Any advice on triangulating excellence? Like, did you get those 2 reps initially right? Did you have to let one go? Because it feels like a lot of this process hinges on those 2, having some sort of success. Talk me through how you got those right, or maybe you didn't, and what you learned.
First one, I totally got it right, but I think it was more luck than skill. The person was just a really phenomenal prospector and a student of the game, both of sales and of restaurants. So when they reached out to someone, they were able to be credible. That one of my mentors said there's 4 sales inside of every sale. The first one is credibility. The next one is there's got to be a need or a want there. The third one is the value to price ratio has to make sense. And fourth, there's got to be urgency. And if you don't have any one of those 4, you don't have a sale, right? So as a founder, you have a new company. There's no halo of credibility. The only place credibility comes from is from your ability to create it on the fly, dynamically, asking good questions, being prepared, having the founder title. Like, those things all bring credibility, right? But when you start with those next 2 reps, some of those things, like, they have to be able to ask good questions. They have to be able to create their own credibility, and they don't have the founder title. So in many ways, it's harder for those next 2 reps than it was for you as the founder. So, for us, I think it largely depends on the ACVs that you're dealing with too, like to determine who the prototype is. In our case, around that time, the company, the ACVs were maybe 80 to 100K ish, and they kept going up over time. But, someone who's sold in that sort of a space before that, ACV range, I think that's key. I think something that has the sales cycle in terms of time is another key part of it. So those are things you can interview for, but then I think there's just like, hustle, tenacity. First person we hired, his name was Eric, and he was amazing at outbound, like way better at outbound than I was. And he was a machine about it. So he was able to generate more, discovery calls, and he would bring me to those, and we'd tag team it together. So, so those were some of the things. And then we didn't nail every early hire, but we got enough of them down. I also screwed up the VP of sales thing too a couple of times before we got it right. But there's a great Jason Lemkin post on that one. The 48 types of a VP of sales, I think, is something related to the blog post title, and it basically talks about how, depending on your revenue, what you need from a sales leader is different. In the very early days, you need someone who can like kind of sell and who can understand why these two reps are working. In the later days, I think he calls it Mr. and Mrs. Dashboards, right? And there's a whole gradient in between there. Building systems, building infrastructures, and one of the steps in the middle. So you got to kind of know what you're looking for as well there.
That's great. Thanks for breaking that down. And again, we'll pull up the 48 types of VPs of sales. I remember you're quoting some good stuff on this one. I remember that post as well. One for me to revisit again. All right, man. Final two questions, and thank you so much for sharing your entire journey. It's truly incredible, and I hope folks are learning a lot from it. I know I've got a page of notes right here. Final two questions. I always keep the same. They're intentionally vague. You can reiterate something we already talked about or highlight something completely different. But what's one thing revenue leaders believe to be true, a tactic or a strategy that you think is bullshit or no longer relevant or serving us?
My mind goes to being sold myself, right? And having sat through sales processes before. And I can't tell you the number of times I get like, oh, could we book, time to have a 15-minute intro call? And it's like, for what? Like what problem are you trying to solve? Or it comes off like, let's be friends. And what I would tell our sales team is, at this point in my life, I have enough friends, right? I'm not looking for new friends, actually. The people who've become close friends of mine over the last 5 to 10 years, it often started in a professional context where I learned something from them. They taught me something new or changed how I thought on a particular thing. And that created the, kind of the credibility where like, wow, this person's actually legit and is going to help me grow. There's someone I want to be in my life moving forward. So I think if I had to put it succinctly, there's kind of, maybe not, I don't know how contrarian this actually is, but a lot of people think, relationships causes sales. And I guess that's true, but I don't think you can start with like, let's be friends. I think you have to start with learning. So learning causes relationships, causes sales is how I talk about it. So yeah, that's why discovery calls are so important, is you're trying to figure out, not only am I qualifying this, but like, what does this person believe that isn't exactly true? And how can I ask them the right questions to be able to like make that clear to them in a respectful, kind, professional way. So I think that's kind of the key thing. It's learning causes relationships, causes sales.
I like it. And in that instance that you talk about where people are asking for this, 15-minute intro, how would you switch that to make it more of, a teaching conversation that allows you to showcase, or teach?
Yeah, I think it's, it some of it is just, and I don't think there's anything like too rocket sciencey here, but it's like, make it about them, not about you, right? So make it buyer focused, not seller focused. So for example, one of the things we did was we had, for every restaurant group out there, we had their tech stack as we could find it out based on looking at their website. So depending on who your competitor was, we might ask in the email, hey, I noticed that you were using XYZ system. Are you totally satisfied with how it blah, 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 right? Are you totally satisfied with how it captures and enables you to collect customer data, right? And we knew that the answer was no, but nevertheless, we would ask it, right? So that's one way, is like, figuring out, kind of putting a line in the water, like, is there pain here? I think the other one is, is more problem oriented, right? So for example, hi there, Scott, I noticed that you opened 20 new restaurants last year, and you're north of 100 now, and you raised private equity financing. Congrats on all that. We've seen customers of ours when they hit that, that plateau. Here are some of the challenges they have. They start to have a really fragmented tech stack, and none of the things talk. Are you satisfied with how well your tech stack is talking, to the other systems? And again, we knew that a lot of times the answer was no, right? So, that making it more about like the buyer rather than like, we sell CDP and CRM for restaurants. Everyone puts that stuff in the recycle bin.
And it sounds like when you sent out that, going back to your story of like the email to 3,600 people, that's why you got this response that ultimately changed the business, as you focused on why it mattered to them versus your product, functionality and features and what you were.
And I bet if we pulled up that email now, I'd be embarrassed.
Would you cringe a little bit?
Yeah, I'm sure. But yes, it was like the very early versions of that idea.
Yeah. There's a quote, I can't remember but it's something along the lines of like, if you're not embarrassed by the you or the stuff that you did like 5 years ago, you're not like growing or evolving quick enough. So, we'll just say you learned a lot since 2016.
That feels like me.
Yeah. All right. Final question. What's one thing that's working for you right now in the go-to-market sense? I know you're kind of in between, you're ideating, so it's an interesting time for you, but what's one thing that's working or working for any companies that you're kind of a part of?
Well, what's working right now for me, very, very early days of incorporating another company. We filed the incorporation stuff a couple weeks ago, and we've been
Congrats.
jamming on it. Thank you. It's different the second time around, but so what we did was I've had hundreds and hundreds of calls with people around the space, like our potential customers, their customers, people who are like influencers or consultants in that whole thing, just to understand like the view, because it's not in restaurants what I'm working on next, right? So it's a different industry. And if I've learned anything, one of the things I've learned is that anytime you sign up for a new learning curve, i.e. a different industry, it's good for probably 2 years worth of kicks in the teeth. And, so I'm trying to get up that learning curve as quickly as possible. And so just talking to tons and tons of people. From that experience, I think naturally started to figure out some common pain points and came up with a proposed solution to it. So now when I'm talking to potential customers, it's shifting more into like a sales conversation rather than a customer discovery one. And I will legitimately say, if I think it's a good fit, like I would love for you to be a first customer, and I would love to sell you vaporware. Full stop. Like usually selling vaporware is a bad thing, right? But I'm like, I would love to sell you vaporware that is an LOI, letter of intent, that says, here's the problem statement. We'll define it succinctly. Here's the product spec that we think solves that. And here's some thoughts around timeline and pricing. That way everyone's on the same page, and it makes it concrete what you're going to do, right? So with that, it's a one pager. We're able to sign people up on LOIs. And I think, pretty close to having a couple $100K of ARR committed on like an LOI. And then once that's there, we will go build it. And we have confidence after having built all the stuff we built with Wisely, we have confidence that we can go build software. That's not a question for us. And I think in many ways, it's also not a question for the potential customers, because they can go see what we did with Wisely. So the hardest part is making sure that you're really, really precise in defining the problem well. And then you have that spec that is the fewest number of things that you would need to do. Hopefully it's just 1, 2, or 3 things that the product would do to solve that problem. And then you build it and people pay. So that is working for us. And we're trying to strike the right balance between like getting all, I think it needs to be a very limited set of people, like, certainly no more than 10 customers, maybe more like 5, right? And so we're picking 3 or so that are part of like one customer profile, and then 1 each from an adjacent customer profile, because we want to make sure that what we're building is like more broadly applicable than just this one tiny little niche. We want to focus on this niche So once we ship the first version of it, we will double and triple and quadruple down in that niche. But we also want to make sure that the scalability of the idea is there as well. And that's something one of my investors from Wisely said. He's now a VC at Unusual Ventures. But I asked him what do founders not usually get right about their startup ideas? And he said he will find one of two failure modes. Oftentimes there's no vision at like a high level. Like, if we're successful, this will change. And this is like a really big idea. So the ideas are often not big enough in his view. The second part he said was that if they have a big idea, there are sometimes there's no path to getting there, right? For a startup, you need to have certain things that the startup doesn't have. So basically what he said is you got to have like a concrete path of how you're going to get to this desired end state. And you have to be able to kind of plot it out at the beginning. And if you don't have either one of those, it'll be challenging. In the case where you don't have the initial path, you'll never find product market fit, or you won't hit material revenue. And in a case where, you don't have a big enough vision, you'll top out at 10, 20, 30, 40 million of ARR, and it won't scale beyond that. And so, or it'll get harder beyond that, or maybe the market isn't big enough, but, so anyways, I'm trying to run those two, clear both of those two hurdles by doing this LOI process the way I described.
I mean, those last 3 minutes, any pre-seed founders or founders looking to, start a business truly from scratch, like that's an incredible way to do it. You're de-risking it for yourself, for, your customers, because you built software before. And yeah, it's almost like you've got the demand before you build the product. And I feel like that's going to be the future of a lot of businesses, even in B2B. I think we saw it in B2C a lot, where people will build like community or a big presence or a following or whatever it may be, and then they'll ask that audience what they want, and then they'll just go build it. And we haven't really fully seen that happen in B2B. Sounds like you're embracing that model, which is super cool. Well, Mike, this has been incredibly valuable. Appreciate you spending the time, man. If people want to follow along with you, learn more, connect, hear about what you're building, we do get some VCs. I'm sure you'll have some people knocking on your door about this new idea. What's the best place to reach you? LinkedIn, Twitter?
Yeah, LinkedIn. I need to be better about Twitter. I'm a constant lurker, but I don't post much. But LinkedIn is probably the best place to find me.
Beautiful, man. Awesome. And for all those listeners who hung out with us, thank you so much. Of course, I always say it, listening's one thing, executing is very different. Think about these, internalize them, go apply them to whatever you're building or helping scale right now. And we'll see you next week.
Thanks, Scott. Take care.